Welcome back to the Interrogation Room. Today I'm excited to introduce a special guest to you. That is Detective Richie Hann. He's my former partner in Sheriff's Homicide. And Richie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it.
Listen, we got a lot to get into, so I want to give the audience a little idea of what we're going to talk about today. Today we decided to cover just one of the many cases that you worked while you were a homicide investigator, and that was a 2003 cold case of a man living in Lemon Grove. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And this particular case is interesting because not only was it a cold case that you helped crack, but it also led to a lot of intense media coverage worldwide. And let me explain. This particular case is such that at the sentencing of the defendant in this case, or the suspect in this murder, the judge in San Diego actually decided directly following the sentencing to go ahead and marry the inmate to his new bride. And she even went as far as baking him a cake, believe it or not. And for that reason, that particular action outraged the family of the victim, obviously, in this case, and it garnered national media attention. And so just so you know, Detective Hann, I'm sorry, is the detective that actually worked the case firsthand, took it from a cold case and actually solved it. So having said all that, that's what we're going to be discussing today. Richie, would you mind telling the audience a little bit about your background and where you worked during your career?
Yes, I was worked for the San Diego Sheriff's Department for a little over 32 years. Of course, you start out in the academy. I graduated the academy in April of 1987, was assigned to the jail because at that time we didn't have a correctional program. All deputies went to the jail. I worked there for just under 4 years, was transferred to the Santee Station Patrol in 1991, January, and worked there until I was actually made area detectives out of that station, and worked there until I went to homicide in 2004. So my last 20 years of my career was in investigations, and I conducted a lot of different types of investigations, but the last 14 years plus of my career, I was assigned to homicide. And during that tenure, probably close to 12 years was in cold case.
Okay, and so you and I have just, interestingly enough, in retirement, been called out of retirement, and we are going to be testifying in a double homicide that I was proud to assist Detective Hann with. That was a cold case double murder out of Ramona. And we can't get too much into the case because we're going to be testifying in the trial soon, but I hope to have Detective Hann back to discuss that case as well, because that is just an amazing case. And so having said that, can you get into today's case a little bit and give the audience some background about what happened in this case?
Sure. The case involves the victim who was named Kevin Santos. He was murdered on North Bonita Street in Spring Valley in 2003. The crime scene was an apartment complex. There was 2 apartment buildings, a total of 4 apartments in each building. They were parallel to each other. You drove into the complex between the buildings. There was 2 upstairs apartments and 2 downstairs apartments, so a total of 8 apartments with some parking area in the back. And interestingly, behind the complex was a open space, and then there was a large church with a school attached to it, part of the church. The case came to me because initially it was worked. Mr. Santos did not die. He was in a rehab facility after he was released from the hospital. Obviously an invalid, but he was still alive. He didn't pass away for almost 8 months, 6 months. So the initial investigation was kept at the area level because they were investigating as an attempted murder. So they had the initial investigation, and when he finally passed away, the case was sent over to us. It was initially assigned to an on-call team member who had originally assisted the team in the Lemon Grove area detectives. That team member passed it on to another team member, and at some point there was a DNA hit that came in on that case from some DNA on a pair of shoes that was recovered from the crime scene. At that point, that team was extremely busy with on-call current cases they were working, so they passed it over to us in cold case. And I picked the case up and started working it. The case involved a shooting. Mr. Santos was shot once in the back of the neck area and paralyzed, and ultimately expired from those injuries. The crime scene was fairly basic. The main piece of evidence was the shoe that was found. It was one white tennis shoe, along with some other stuff. Obviously, it appears that when the suspect, who turned out to be Danny Desbrow, ran from the scene, he either lost the shoe, ran out of the shoes. We're not sure exactly how the shoes were left there, but it did identify him as having been at that scene at some point. Of course, to complicate the case, we didn't know how long the shoe had been there or when it was left there. After doing some investigation, there was a number of people in the apartment. Now, just for context, it was one of the upstairs apartment on the south side of the complex. Living in that apartment was a man and his wife, some children. There was no kids at the scene at the time. A girl by the name of Dina Guzman lived there as well. She had dated the suspect at some point and had some sort of relationship with Mr. Santos. I don't know the extent of it, a dating type of relationship at the time. Mr. Santos was unemployed at the time, so he was spending, copious amounts of time up there. Apparently, on the day that this happened, there was some kind of a confrontation. Mr. Desbrow came into the apartment. There was a confrontation. He walked Mr. Santos and escorted him out. He grabbed a hold and was walking him out. And then everyone heard gunshots, and they went out to find Mr. Santos at the bottom of the staircase, bleeding from a apparent head wound. It was a neck wound just behind the head. During the investigation, after interviewing multiple people, I came to the conclusion that the only witness we probably had in this case was Dina Guzman. She had been outside. Everybody kept saying, "Why are you talking to me? Talk to Dina. She was out there." Going back to the original report, she had been interviewed and, of course, denied seeing the actual murder. I re-interviewed her. She basically gave the same statement and, of course, omitted the fact that she had seen the actual homicide. I had a feeling, obviously, that she was lying to me. I told her that. I said, I don't feel that you're straight up lying to me, but it's called lying by omission. Basically, she's not telling me everything she knows. Basically, what she told me was true. It's just she left out part of the end part that was the most critical.
The important part, right?
The important part, yeah. So I went back at her. She got arrested. I went back at her in jail. Wouldn't talk. I mean, she talked to me. She was very cordial. She's a very nice lady, but just didn't want to get into this. To put some context into this, Mr. Desbrow was a Nazi lowrider, or at least associated with Nazi lowriders, which is primarily a prison gang. So they can be known to be violent, and they don't like people snitching on them, basically, or testifying against them. Because of that, she was a concern for her safety, which was an obvious concern. It kind of transpired. I finally got there was a camera that was recovered originally from the crime scene from her bedroom that had film that was never developed. So I wanted to develop it. Unfortunately, the search warrant was long expired. So I went to her to get consent. She signed a consent to have the film developed and for us to view it. So I took the camera and had the film developed. Of course, I had, 10, 15 pictures on this roll of Instamatic film that I had no clue who they were. So I took it back to the jail to tell her, to have her look at and identify some of these people. And as I walked in, I remember this to this day. It was really a poignant, it was a tipping point in the investigation. She said, Danny Desbrow killed him. And I said, "How do you know that, Dina?" She said, "Because I saw the whole thing." And at that point, we sat down, turned on the recorder, and she told us everything about how she had seen what he did. And essentially, he had walked him out of the apartment, she followed him out and saw him shoot him as he got to the top of the stairs. Mr. Santos fell forward and slid down the rail and onto the ground.
Do we know what the motive was in the shooting? Did she divulge that?
I don't think she knows. There was some kind of an altercation between the two, it was a verbal argument. Nobody seems to be able to identify exactly what the argument was about, whether it was something to do with her or something else or drugs or, any combination of things. I never was able to put my finger on exactly why they were arguing, but apparently it escalated into a physical confrontation.
Okay.
And he basically just grabbed him and was walking him out the door, trying to control him. And he had a gun at that point. When he got outside, he shot him.
I understand there was some sort of a dating relationship. Is that right?
Yes, she had actually dated the suspect earlier on prior to this crime. And then she had dated the victim as well, is my understanding.
Do you think that had something to do with maybe the motive?
I do. I believe that could have had something to do with it, but I can't say, there's nothing that I have to say exactly what the argument was about or what caused that argument.
Okay.
So anyway, part of the things that complicated this case were the fact that the gentleman that was living in the apartment, or actually rented it, that had the apartment leased, was just recently out of jail or prison. I don't recall which, but he was on probation and he had a gun in the house. And when this thing went down, he realized the police were coming to the house. So he took all the bullets he had and threw them on the apartment complex roof next door to his, because he was in the second. That was a single story. And gave the gun to Desbrow to get rid of.
Nothing like complicating your case a little bit, right?
No. He told me the gun did not. And the reason we knew there was a gun or suspected is we found the holster in the oven. I didn't, but the guys, detectives that searched the scene found the holster inside the oven. Wow. So they knew there was probably a gun around. And so after interviewing him, he admitted that he had this gun. He had got it for protection, but he said it didn't work. There was something wrong with the firing pin or something. I don't recall. Yeah. So anyway, we did recover a gun from the school next door when the landscaping people were out working on it one day. They were trimming back bushes about 4 or 5 months later and found this handgun. It was a .380, I believe. Well, of course, they called the sheriff's department. Fortunately, the deputy who responded, the patrol deputy, remembered this case and went, wow, we had a murder right next door with a .380, I think. I'm going to, notify detectives. So it did get attached to our case, fortunately. But after ballistic testing, it showed that was not the gun that killed him.
Okay, but so, sometimes cases have like red herrings. You have to follow up.
They have a lot of red herrings. They complicate things. And to add insult to injury, I had another individual, Mr. Clayton Thacker, who came forward saying that he witnessed this whole thing and saw Desbrow shoot Kevin Santos. He was at a friend's house, which is next door to the apartment complex. Now, you got to put this in context. This is like one of a few, like 1 or 2 complexes on that street. They're not big, large complexes. Right. So this home was directly north of it. So the first thing I did was go out to the house to see, if he could have seen what he said he saw. Well, obviously he couldn't, because the building blocks your view of where this all happened. So I knew that Mr. Thacker was lying, but he had specific information that I believe was accurate and seemed to match with the case as far as I knew it. So I believe that he was either at the scene and didn't want to admit to being there, or he had talked to somebody that was there. We ultimately went to prison. He was in jail on some minor charges, and went up and talked to him, and he actually laid it out for me, because I was.
What prison was that?
He was at Soledad at the time. Okay. And I went there with our good friend Detective Lopez, and we interviewed Mr. Thacker, and I'm trying to remember, it might have not have been with Juan. I think I went up there with Dan Aarons. Anyway. Okay. When I got there, I was ready to confront him about all this, and I had photos, everything laid out to say, hey, you couldn't have seen what you saw, but how do you have this information? Well, as soon as I walked in, he said, hey, I lied to you guys. I didn't see this at all. He said, but Desbrow told me about it after the fact. He told him how he had got into an argument with the guy, got mad at him, yanked him out of the apartment and shot him. And he hadn't
seen it firsthand. He had not seen it.
No, he did not see it firsthand. Remember, we said if he had seen it, he would have had to been right with them, which is possible, because witnesses had seen a car come and go from the scene, pull in just before the shooting and leave after the shooting. So I believe Desbrow came in that vehicle and then ran on foot from the scene is
Okay.
what happened. The car left the scene immediately after the shooting, and the car driver that everybody saw did not match his description at all, and we never identified who that driver was.
Okay.
So Mr. Desbrow, apparently this gun that they used, they got from a friend, and we had to go back and verify the information because the friend they got it from lived in Spring Valley, and he was dabbling in and out of jail with some minor petty crimes and such. And they found out that his father or someone in the house had a gun that they stashed in a particular location. So the follow-up investigation indicated that there was a gun stolen from there. They never filed a report because they didn't think it would have done any good because they didn't have the serial numbers. It turned out that the woman, actually the friend of Thacker who procured the gun for him, his mother, I spoke with her, and she did say that there had been a burglary of their home while they were on a Thanksgiving vacation for 3 or 4 days up to the Fresno area. And they came home and found their house had been, the house had been burglarized, back door had been kicked in, and the only thing missing was the gun, which interestingly was stored in a specific location in a closet in the bedroom. So somebody had to know it was there in order to get it.
A friend or somebody, right?
Right. So I think he told them where it was, and they went in and got it, is what transpired. So
I'm sorry, how much prior to the homicide did this theft occur of the gun?
I couldn't tell you. It was a few months.
Okay, so not
it
too.
turns, yeah, it wasn't too long. It turns out that
Okay.
well, they couldn't remember specific dates on it. She tried to narrow it down as much as she could, but it was within a year.
Okay.
The gun actually belonged to her father-in-law, and he had been terminally ill and living in Florida, so they brought him back to California to live with them, and while he was in hospice before he passed away, and he brought the gun with him. So the gun was there. Her husband had actually, his son had passed away, and she couldn't give me much detail on the gun because she didn't know much about it. She just remembered the only things taken from the house was that gun.
Okay.
And so we believe that's where the gun came from. We never recovered the weapon. So back to that, after the shooting, Thacker got together with Desbrow, and he told him about all that had occurred, and that Joshua Chance, another individual, had been there at the scene. We believe that, Thacker also said that Desbrow wanted him to dispose of the gun. He said, I ain't getting involved in no murders, and I ain't doing no disposal of any murder weapons. You're crazy. And Desbrow said, well, I messed up the barrel, so they can't do any rifling or, any ballistic testing on it. But Thacker said, I have no idea what he did with the gun, because he said, I kind of stepped away from it at that point. So he became a pretty crucial, witness in the case, being able to establish some of the information as to where the gun was procured from, where we, and how this went down. We also tried to talk to Joshua Chance. Now, Mr. Chance was a close friend and associate of Mr. Desbrow, and also an associate of the Nazi lowriders. He was
Before you continue, I wanted to mention to the audience that this is a fascinating part of your story. And I just wanted to preempt it by saying that if you ever wanted to know what it was like to have a detective that was tenacious, that would not give up on justice, it's Detective Han. And this part of the story is fascinating. And this is why great detectives that do great police work get results and find justice. So I just wanted to preempt what you're about to hear, because I was fascinated when I heard this portion of the story. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, we knew that Mr. Chance was there, so probably the only other witness besides Dina Guzman that probably actually saw the murder was Josh Chance. So, of course, we didn't think we were going to get a lot of traction with him as far as the, talking to us. But we couldn't even find him, to be honest with you. He was out of prison at the time. He had just gotten out of jail or prison, I don't recall, and he was out in San Diego. We picked up information from a informant somewhere, not one of my informants, somebody else, a DAI had an informant or someone that gave some information that he was living at a house in the city of San Diego. Apparently him and a couple other individuals were living there. This elderly lady had allowed them to have this house because they were going to do some work on it to fix it up so she could sell it. I don't know how much work they were doing there, but we went to the house several times, knocked on the door. I left my card. He wouldn't come to the door. I still wasn't sure he was living there. I don't know, it was the second, third, maybe the fourth time I went out there to bang on that door. I figured if I kept knocking on that door, they were going to get tired of me eventually and, have them come out and talk to me. I just wanted to have a chat with them. That was it.
So you were
I
like
wasn't going to,
Columbo, the guy who wouldn't go away, right?
yeah, I told Juan Lopez, our good friend Juan was with me the one time, and
Fellow detective.
yeah, we got there, and he said, he's in the backyard, I think. So we walked over to the fence in the backyard, and there he was. And we said, Josh, I need to talk to you. And he went in the house with these other guys. I told Juan, I said, I was ready to set up on the sidewalk. I said, I'll get a cooler and an umbrella and some sodas, and I'll sit out there until the guys are sick and tired of me sitting in front of their house and send him out. Well, they sent him out because he came bebopping down the sidewalk from the front door. And of course, we had the recorder running, talking to him. We said, hey, I need to know about this, investigating this murder. He said, I don't know anything about any murder. I said, you know anybody named Danny Desbrow? I said, I've never heard of the guy. I don't know anything about him. I said, yeah, know nothing about this murder on North Bonita because people say you were there and went and said, I've never even been on North Bonita. I don't even know where that is. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. So the conversation was quick. It ended quickly and we were done. At trial, he became the key witness for the defense, of course, and claimed that he was there and watched the whole thing and it was an accident. Well, of course, that whole thing was blown out of the water because of the statement we got from him that he was never there and didn't know anything about it and didn't even know the defendant. Mm. So interestingly, to backtrack on that a little bit, we knew that there was something going on between these guys because the phone conversations that we were listening to from jail are recorded. And I mean, everybody knows this pretty much, but they tell you 50 times not to talk on there because everything's recorded, but they were talking and he was talking to his mother, the defendant was, and they were discussing this case. Because to back up, Pete, I had originally interviewed the suspect when we finally got him in custody on another case, and he denied ever being there, had no idea about this case, and just basically he wasn't there. I said, that's fine. Locking him down to a statement, and that was great because a lot of these guys
didn't know anything.
Yeah, a lot of these guys won't even give us the time of day. So the fact that he even talked to me and waived Miranda was outstanding. So I was like, okay, great. You weren't there to have nothing to do with this. I can just forget about you. So, okay, good. I appreciate that. So anyway, going back, during the jail conversations, he basically puts himself at the scene because he's talking to his mom about the trajectory of the round was down. He said, well, I was never upstairs. I was downstairs. So, I mean, right there, he puts himself at the scene.
Right.
But the interesting thing was they were discussing now they were using the name Gandhi as this guy's kind of code name. We believe we later identified that as being Mr. Chance. He was telling his mom, hey, I think I'm going to switch up the defense. I'm going to try something else. And, his mom was like, well, what are you doing? He said, well, have you talked to Josh or talked to Gandhi about this? She said, yeah, I talked to him, but he said all he wants to do is get on the stand and tell the truth. And Mr. Desbrow goes, well, that isn't going to work. So I said, well, telling the truth, I guess, isn't going to work for you guys. But yeah, it was interesting. So we had a lot of
kind of incriminating right there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we got into this trial with one key witness. We had to relocate her, of course.
Yes.
And one of the big well, not a big issue, but one of the issues they made at trial was the fact that she continued to associate with the defendant after the shooting.
The witness.
The witness did. Yeah, and we had to, this is where the DA has to really get the information out to the jury, because they have to understand that as long as she was hanging out with these guys, she was friends with them, she wasn't a threat.
Right.
But as soon as she decides that she's going to testify against them, now she's a problem, and her life was definitely put at risk. So we had to relocate her to another location. And
so the friendship was over, so to speak.
Yeah. But they made a lot about that during the trial, about how she kept hanging out with him and talking to him, writing letters to him, phone calls, which is fine, because until she decides to testify, she's just a friend and a homie, as they say, but now she's a threat.
Right.
So she came in and testified, did an outstanding job,
Told the truth.
told the truth, and the jury
Yeah.
loved her. She wasn't, the best witness. You never necessarily pick someone like that. Like they say, sometimes when you work these cases, you got to go to hell to get your witnesses. But she was an outstanding witness, and I to this day appreciate her because she flipped this whole case.
Yeah.
She had the guts to stand up to these guys, to take the stand, knowing that she was doing a thing that could put her life in danger, definitely.
Yeah.
And she told the truth, and that was very powerful. The jury later spoke with us and said that was very powerful. They believed her. When the defense tried to dirty her up a little bit, they were like, "This is not working." I mean, they really, really, really appreciated what she did. So
And that's what it takes, isn't that right? That it takes brave people to join with us who are working the cases and trying to pursue justice, to have the intestinal fortitude or the courage to come forward and testify, because we can't make cases without witnesses like this, right?
no, we can't. And like I said, it was it really exasperated the situation because she was really my only witness that would testify.
Yeah,
And really, without her, I didn't have a case.
right,
I had a lot of circumstantial stuff, but no case.
right.
And so I knew that she was my focus, and I worked on her. I interviewed her. She had been interviewed originally. I re-interviewed her several times. I interviewed a lot of people. Re-interviewed everybody on that case. Everybody was re-interviewed, and plus a bunch of additional witnesses from the complex. But I kept coming back to her, and I wasn't trying to be overly forceful with her, but I just kept telling her, "You're the only one that can make this case because you were there and saw it." And when she finally came clean, it was a pretty powerful moment for her. I think um, I do recall her telling me when I was there the first time when she was still lying to me.
Hmm.
She did mention the fact that she was having nightmares about this a lot. People don't have
Wow.
nightmares about something that's not bothering them. You know what I mean? It's
Yes.
not in their subconscious. So I knew that she knew and that she had been there. But I had to be patient with her. I had to be kind with her. She's a human being. She was under a lot of stress.
Yes.
But I'll tell you one thing, that girl stood up and, she did what she had to do. And I have a lot of respect for her. I really do.
Yes.
Um, and because of that, we were able to flip this case. Of course, Clayton, he helped with the case too. He didn't make it easy to get him on the stand. We couldn't find him and serve him with his subpoena, so we had to arrest him and ended up having to come into court in jail clothes, but that worked out fine. He did take the
Mhm.
stand and told the truth as well, so that was pretty good stuff.
Okay.
It's rare that you get a case with people with those kind of past and the priors that these people have dealt with and the demons they were dealing with to actually step up to the plate and do the right thing. That's pretty impressive, and I had nothing to do with that. That was on them. They were willing to
Yes.
do that.
Good people. You find good people sometimes in these cases that maybe get prejudged, right, for their past or their history or their drug abuse or whatever the issue is. But
Yeah.
you find good people that finally come forward to help make your cases, right?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's difficult sometimes because of the type of people you're dealing with and the propensity for violence and, the fear that they have of these people, which is
Right.
valid.
Right.
But I understand that, it takes a lot of guts. It took a lot of guts for her to take that stand and tell the truth. I mean, it was pretty impressive.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the verdict when it came back, your thoughts, how it went down, the families?
Yeah, it was. Of course, I'd been working with the family along with the prosecutor Joe McLaughlin, and we were working with the family, so we always develop a rapport with the family. You become like part of the family, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they were Pacific Islander of descent, so I mean they were great people, just down to earth, the kind of people that I mean that's why we do this job is for the victims, to bring
Right.
justice to the victims and to the families and closure for the families because the families suffer from these horrific crimes, and being able to give them a little bit of closure is very satisfying. Um, the family as a whole, it's a very big family, had a lot of people involved, and they were there every day. His mother was there, sisters.
Can you tell me a little bit about what your key witness testified to, what actually went down?
Yeah, she was inside her bedroom. and I guess the victim had popped in, said hi, and then left. So she didn't know anything was going on until she heard the fight out in the living room, and he was literally fist fighting with Santos, I guess, and he came out, or there was a fight. I don't remember the specific details. There was a fight, a physical confrontation, and she came out. He was already outside with him, or was walking in the process of walking him out. So she went out on the front landing, and that's when she saw him with the gun to the back of the guy's head, and she shot him.
So she saw Desbrow with the gun?
Yeah, and she saw him pull the trigger and shoot this guy, and it's Santos. And then Santos kind of went limp and went onto the railing and literally slid down the railing for most of that staircase and hit the ground, which was consistent with the scene evidence, because they made a lot of noise about not having blood at the top of the stairs, but as a pathologist testified, that type of wound wouldn't have necessarily bled a lot initially because of where it was placed. The biggest problem was it caused him to be paralyzed. It didn't initially, kill him, because it wasn't actually a headshot. It was more of a neck shot, I guess you'd say. But because of him being on, essentially on life support, he developed pneumonia and other complications, which ultimately took his life. So
right, and that's something to be noted, because it's my understanding that the medical examiner will place the cause of death as homicide, even if a person dies from a bullet wound 15 years later. Isn't that right?
yeah, there's a time frame in California, obviously, but yeah, to make it a presumptive. But yeah, there are cases where they have been able to prosecute them years later for those type of injuries. This was a little more clear cut, because obviously he was down and out because of this gunshot wound. So all the issues that he was having medically were a direct result of that gunshot wound. He wouldn't have had or never had any of these medical issues before. So,
Absolutely. And
and
you
I knew
mentioned, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I knew the family knew he was not going to make it at some point. But they had him in a convalescent rehab center care place, and he eventually developed some complications and passed away, unfortunately.
Okay, and I think you had mentioned previously there was a key moment or a key piece of evidence in the case, and you mentioned the shoe, right? What did you find in the shoe?
Inside the shoe, there was some blood on the shoe, which DNA analysis indicated belonged to Desbrow, and that's how this whole case got rolling. When they did the DNA analysis on the shoe, they realized that it came back to him on a CODIS hit, because CODIS is a system we enter DNA profiles into in California, and then goes nationwide. But the California system obviously hit on him because he is he had been formerly incarcerated and tested, so he was in the system.
So he had a criminal history.
Yes.
And so a question is that particular shoe, did it belong to the victim and it had Desbrow's blood on it? Is that correct?
No, it belonged to Desbrow.
Okay, so that shoe, was it left at the scene?
Yeah, but it was towards the back area of the parking lot. Like, he was probably running from the scene, which he actually took the stand in this case and testified. So, and that he did run from the scene. I believe that the shoe was probably loose or came off when he was going over that fence, something, because there was a jacket and some other stuff that he left on that fence. I think he got hung up in that fence area and just, was discarding, or stuff came off as he was trying to get out of there, because he was running for his life at that point. Because he knew the cops were coming, fire department's going to be coming, the police are going to descend on that place like, a swarm of hornets, and there's going to be, deputies everywhere. So he wanted to get out of that area. I don't know this for a fact, but maybe that's why he didn't get back in the car, or he just didn't have enough forethought. Maybe they left before he got down there. But
Right.
Obviously he was looking to get out of there, and he actually hid up in some areas, and then was until it kind of cleared out, and then he took off.
Were you able to determine where Desbrow's blood came from? Where did he get an injury?
No, I don't recall. I'm most likely from the fight, because he was involved in a fight. So there was, whether it was from his nose or whatever, I never was able to establish where the blood came from, or even if it came from that incident. But we were able to at least identify him, or a piece of his clothing that was at the scene. So
that placed him there.
That placed him there at some point.
Contrary to the statement he gave you that he knew nothing about it.
Yeah, and that's where, of course, it comes in later when he tried to, the defense changed to they actually changed the defense to the defense kind of came out that, yeah, he did shoot him, but it was an accident, that he tripped, as he was trying to walk him out, he tripped and the gun went off, and he shot him and it was an accident. Well, that doesn't really hold any water when he claimed he was never at the scene, didn't know anything about the case. So
Okay, so let me ask you a question. When the verdict is finally read, and obviously you're sitting there, and the judge and the jury are all there, and the victim and the victim's family is sitting in the courtroom, what was the reaction of the family when the verdict was read, and what was ultimately the verdict?
well, can I back up a little bit here? There was a
Sure.
very interesting thing with this verdict that came in. I've never seen this in my entire career as a deputy, let alone an investigator. But the jury foreman had sent a note to the judge and wanted it read in open court prior to the reading of the verdict.
Really?
And the note said essentially that the jury was requesting armed escort to their vehicles after the reading of the verdict.
Wow. I've
So
never heard that before.
have not either, and the DA had, and he was like, "Ugh." I said, "That's probably pretty good for us." But anyway, yeah, they found him guilty on the homicide and the gun allegation, of course. So he was not sentenced then, but ultimately sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. With, I think he had shattered on 3 years for some other cases that he had pending on him, charges that he had pending to clean that up. So the family was obviously elated. I mean, it's a bittersweet thing for the family. I mean, they've lost a loved one that they can never get back. It's
Yes.
never coming back. But having that verdict and seeing that that person will be held accountable for what they did, essentially the rest of their life, is a huge burden off of their shoulders, and it gives them some closure. I mean, it's kind of odd, but it does give the family closure to be able to see someone held to answer for that heinous crime. So
Yes. So 53 years to life was the verdict?
ultimately, yes.
Okay. And then I understand that as the law requires, the victims have an opportunity to confront or speak directly to the suspect in the case. And that happened here, right?
Yeah, there was a number of family members that spoke, and probably the most interesting and most powerful was his young son. I don't recall his age. He was young, probably 10 to 12 years old, if
This is the
that.
victim's son?
Yeah, he came up there and of course had somebody with him, but he gave a, how he was tortured by this, that this guy took his dad away, and that, he hated him, and if he had a chance, he would have actually have killed him. So, I mean,
Mm,
he was pretty impassioned about it. But it has a horrible impact. I mean, this guy lost his father. He's never going to get that back. We can't
right.
bring him back ever. I mean, so he's going to live the rest of his life without a dad. So that,
Right.
you can understand where they're coming from, and the emotions that come out during these statements. Sometimes they're very canned and people just read them because they're emotional and they can't try to get it out, they break down. But he was pretty straightforward. He was a strong young man. I'm sure he'll do great in life, but it was interesting.
Yes. So after the verdict, I mean, we just learned some new news today together, and but I wanted to speak a little bit to the fact that there was some outrage towards the judge, and it actually went national, right? The international, the media picked up on it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was some information that we picked up on around the time of sentencing. I don't recall if it was before or right after, but anyway, that the judge was going to marry the defendant and his current girlfriend after the rendering of the verdict. So um, we after the verdict was they were done with all the court proceedings, we ended up leaving, but it came out that she did marry them, and I guess she actually made a cake because they had some cake, and of course the family found out about this and they were pretty upset. They called us, and the one thing I had to agree with the district attorney on this is that the judges are allowed to marry people, and maybe it wasn't the best timing, but bottom line is the judge did an outstanding job on this case. She made good rulings. Everything was solid. This thing went up on appeal. It was upheld on appeal without any issues at all. So
Okay.
from that respect, we're very grateful for the judge and the job that she did. So that was something that was between her and the family, and I guess I mean, I can kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit. You know, they
Sure.
definitely were not happy about that. So
Did you attend the wedding?
no, we actually asked him if we could stay for the wedding when we were finishing up. He told us no, so we just had left. I mean,
So you were disinvited, I take that.
I was disinvited. I wasn't really
Right,
interested in attending this guy's
right,
wedding, to be honest with you.
right.
So, and of
So it
course, the
was
family was out of the courtroom at that time as well. So they found out about it after the fact, which I think, made it a little more upsetting to them.
right. And the fact that the judge baked a cake, I guess that was in their minds, they thought that was a little outrageous, right?
I don't know if she baked the cake. She had cake there, I guess, because I was told that they got cake from her. So I don't know where she got it. I know she likes to bake, so maybe she did bake it. I don't know.
Right. And I'm telling you this only because I read media accounts that the media had reported that she had baked the cake. But I understand that judges are human and they make their own decisions. And really, it's their domain, it's their courtroom. But yes, I could see the controversy surrounding it, and more than likely why it went international. Um,
Well, the interesting thing about this, Pete, is we tried a guy for a first degree premeditated murder, and I got zero coverage on this. No media. Nobody was interested in some, guy in Spring Valley getting murdered, to be honest with you. It just didn't garner any attention. I had zero interest. But boy, as soon as that judge did that wedding, man, it was all over the media. I think it went worldwide, actually. It was picked up overseas by a lot of the news outlets. So,
that's amazing about the media, right? What will gain their interest versus
yeah,
what was more important here was the fact that you found justice for a victim of murder.
exactly.
So we just learned together today some new news, and can you tell us what we just learned as far as what happened to Desbrow?
Yeah, we were looking through the news releases on this case, which there wasn't a lot, but one of them was that apparently on around the end of November, the 25th of November of last year, 2019, yeah, he was killed in Folsom Prison where he was being housed by some other inmates. So there was a write-up in this, I think it was a Sacramento Bee, but and the only reason I think they wrote it up was because he had got all this attention from getting married after the reading of the verdict by the judge. So I think they picked up on that and ran with that. Normally you get these things from prison, you don't get any traction with them, but there was a write-up about it. So apparently he's gone. I wasn't aware of it till this afternoon when we talked.
Right, and that's it brings to a close a case that took many, many years to solve. You found justice. You didn't give up on your journey to justice. And I appreciate you. And I know there are members of our audience that are watching right now, Richie, that appreciate all the work that you did to find justice in this case. And I know there are countless other cases that we could talk about, but I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done for the citizens in California. And I actually, I want to give you an opportunity to say anything you might want to say now to our audience or to the family of the victim in this case.
Well, first to the family, we do this for you, Pete, for you folks. This is about you guys and the victim, obviously, Kevin. That was my whole purpose, was to bring justice for Kevin and to seek some closure for the family. And I hope I was able to do that. I know there was some things that happened later that stirred up some controversy, but the bottom line is this guy was found guilty and was sentenced to an appropriate sentence and ultimately died in prison for, we don't know what became of that. But anyway, yeah, I appreciated working these cases, and we do it for the families, and that's why we work. And we worked hard on a lot of these cases. This case took a while to come together, but if you stick with them, eventually you'll get the results that you need. It just, a lot of being a detective is just being tenacious and not giving up. You just got to keep going after it until you get the conclusion that on the case that you need. Sometimes it's hard to get that evidence or that statement, but you just have to stay with it.
Richie, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope you could come back and we can discuss after the double murder trial out of Ramona. I hope we can discuss the details of how that case was put together. Would you come back after?
Oh, absolutely. That's another great case. Took a lot longer to get that one solved. but thanks to you and your Spanish speaking skills, we were able to work that case. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you, but appreciate all your help on that. And obviously, we just got some great news that he was finally arrested in Mexico and brought back and is being charged. So we'll be able to maybe hit that up next year, I hope.
Yes, thank you so much, Richie. And I'm looking forward to a new episode with you. And having said that, I want to thank everybody for watching this episode. I would ask you to do us a favor. If you could do me a favor and please click on the subscribe button below. If you like this particular episode, please share it with your friends and family and let them know about this channel, Journey to Justice. We're here for you. And if you like and share and subscribe, that means you want more of this content. And we'll keep bringing it as long as you like this content. So for everybody watching, I want to thank you. And Richie, again, thank you again for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.